What you just saw was a heart simulation in Minecraft from the perspective of standing in front of somebody with their heart cut in half along the coronal plane. I also had to rotate it 30 degrees and separate the right and left sides. As you may know, there are 4 chambers to the heart called right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, and left ventricle. I've labeled these on my simulation for reference. The atria collect blood from veins and pump it into the ventricles. Next, the ventricles pump blood into arteries. The right side contains deoxygenated blood heading toward the lungs, while the left side contains oxygenated blood heading towards the rest of the body. I tried using lava for the left side, but it didn't flow fast or far enough. The heart also has 4 valves separating the ventricles from the atria and the arteries. The closure of these valves generates heart sounds. The tricuspid and mitral close first, followed by the pulmonary and aortic. Here is an animation I tried synchronizing with my simulation to show how these parts work together. First, the atria contract, then the mitral and tricuspid valves close, then the ventricles contract, then the aortic and pulmonary valves close. This is where the valves are located on my heart. The heart also has a conduction system that starts at the right atrium, travels to the left, then meets up between them. Next, it travels down between the ventricles, then up along their sides. The first node is called sinoatrial and the second atrioventricular. I've shown where these are in red boxes, as well as where the ventricular branches are with red curves. Just like in real life, when the SA node fails, the AV node is designed to take over with a slower heart rate. To demonstrate how this works, let's imagine you're a young woman of 30 presenting to the hospital with a racing heart. While in the waiting room, your heart stops beating and you lose consciousness. CPR is begun and an external defibrillator is applied. Rhythm analysis indicates ventricular fibrillation. An electric shock is advised.
Clear?
An echocardiogram shows recovering left ventricular function. Coronary artery disease is ruled out due to your young age, and an electrocardiogram shows no abnormalities. Cardiac troponin levels are elevated, and you admit to receiving the sad news of your father passing while you waited to be seen. You were diagnosed with Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, a temporary condition that mostly affects women after experiencing emotional stress, which causes the left ventricle to temporarily resemble an octopus trap. However, this does not explain your racing heart before receiving the sad news. You tell your doctor that it's been occurring frequently, but he says he can't do anything to help unless it's happening right now. Fortunately, this frustrates you so much that your heart starts racing again, so another electrocardiogram is performed. This time it indicates AV nodal reentrant tachycardia, and you're immediately scheduled for catheter ablation therapy. The trainee cardiologist successfully eliminates the reentrant pathway, but unfortunately his hand slipped and he permanently damaged your sinoatrial node. Although he will probably get away with only a slap on the wrist, you will be forced to spend your life with a slower resting heart rate. Without the SA node to maintain a negative feedback signal, the AV node becomes the primary pacemaker of the heart, sending retrograde signals to ensure atrial contraction. As a previous lover of scary movies and romantic dates, you find this news particularly devastating. So you sign up for cryopreservation and wake up 100 years later when stem cell therapy is able to repair your sinoatrial node. You feel better almost immediately as your sinus rhythm is naturally restored. A constant negative feedback signal is maintained, and that pesky AV node bothers you no more. But the celebration is short-lived because the cryopreservation process led to structural damage of the left ventricle. It has paradoxically become both very compliant and non-compliant, leading to S3 and S4 heart sounds. They grow you a new heart and a human-pig hybrid, and you graciously donate your old one to science. The AI medical students of the future begin their dissection with the right atrium. Taking note of the superior and inferior vena cava, the fossa ovalis, and the coronary sinus. The fossa ovalis being a remnant of a fetal shunt. Next, they observe the tricuspid valve, pointing out its anterior, posterior, and septal leaflets. They also appreciate that it closes after atrial contraction and is associated with the first heart sound. Our budding anatomists make their way to the right ventricle next, where they are met with confusion at the chordae tendineae. Instead of providing tension to prevent tricuspid valve prolapse, they appear to be only for show. But that didn't stop them from admiring how the Purkinje fibers ensured simultaneous ventricular contraction. Moving on to the pulmonary valve, they saw the right, anterior, and left leaflets, and noticed how it was configured to close 0.3 seconds after the tricuspid valve, as to be expected with a resting heart rate of 75 beats per minute. They also speculated as to where the second, third, and fourth heart sounds would originate from. In the left atrium, they saw the right and left, superior and inferior pulmonary veins. When looking at the mitral valve, they wondered how on earth 4 pistons could represent 2 leaflets until they realized that perhaps they were paired. Upon observing the left ventricle, our scalpel-happy robots noticed that the primary difference was the thickness of the walls. This is to accommodate for the fact that systemic resistance is much higher than pulmonary resistance. Despite this discrepancy, their internal monologues reminded them that the end diastolic and end systolic volumes of the 2 ventricles are the same. Next up on the tour guide was the aortic valve, a fascinating structure that contains the entry points to the coronary arteries. Although technically these sinuses should be paired with the anterior and left posterior leaflets, the coroners thought to themselves it's not that unusual to have anatomical variations. Besides, they were too preoccupied with how easy it was to discern the etiologies of heart sounds 2, 3, and 4 to really notice. It was at this point they decided to really dive into the vasculature and marvel at how powerful the aortic pressure can be. On this excursion, they also bore witness to the ligamentum arteriosum, another vestigial fetal shunt that, when patent, is called the ductus arteriosus. Due to the higher pressure of the aorta, a PDA can cause oxygenated blood to flow back into the pulmonary artery. But under normal circumstances, the aorta curves behind the pulmonary artery and minds its own business. The last thing Skynet wanted to investigate was the conduction system. It was here that they were mildly surprised to find an instruction manual for setting heart rates and the typical duration of a cardiac action potential, which is several hundred times slower than your typical nerve cell. That's all for now, guys. Thanks for watching. Smash like if you want me to hook my heart up to an electrocardiogram next.